Billionaire's son makes black waitress crawl, not knowing she's his long-lost sister. What if the person you treated worse turned out to be the family you'd been searching for your whole life? Marcus Wellington III stood in the gleaming marble lobby of his father's hotel, adjusting his $1,000 tie as he watched the staff scurry around like ants. At 28, he'd never worked a day in his life, yet somehow believed he'd earned every privilege handed to him. 3 floors below, in the hotel's bustling restaurant, Maya Johnson was tying her apron with hands that still trembled from exhaustion. She'd been working double shifts for weeks, trying to save enough money to continue her search for the brother she'd lost in foster care 20 years ago. She had no idea that the arrogant young man upstairs shared the same dimpled chin, the same warm brown eyes behind his cold stare. Today, their worlds would collide in the most unexpected way. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Maya had been working at the Wellington Grand Hotel for 3 months, and every day felt like walking through a minefield. The elegant restaurant with its crystal chandeliers and silk wallpaper served the city's elite, people who dropped more money on lunch than she made in a week. She moved between tables with quiet grace, invisible to most guests who saw her uniform rather than her face. What they didn't know was that Maya had a master's degree in social work, dreams bigger than this job, and a heart that refused to harden despite everything life had thrown at her. The other servers had warned her about Marcus Wellington III. "Stay out of his way," Rosa whispered during their morning setup. "That boy's got a mean streak wider than his daddy's wallet." Maya nodded, focusing on polishing silverware until it gleamed. She'd dealt with difficult people before. In foster care, she'd learned to make herself small, to survive by being helpful and staying invisible. Marcus burst through the restaurant doors that Tuesday afternoon like a storm cloud looking for something to rain on. His business meeting hadn't gone well, his father had criticized his presentation that morning, and his girlfriend had just broken up with him via text. He needed someone to blame, someone beneath him to remind him of his power. His cold blue eyes scanned the dining room until they landed on Maya, who was carefully setting a table near the window. "You," he snapped, his voice cutting through the gentle lunch conversation. "The new girl. Come here." Maya's stomach clenched, but she walked over with her head held high. "Yes, sir? How can I help you?" Marcus pulled out his phone and deliberately dropped it on the marble floor. The screen cracked instantly. "Pick that up," he commanded, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. "And while you're down there, these floors look terrible. I want you to get on your hands and knees and clean this entire section. Right now." The restaurant fell silent. Elderly couples stopped eating, their forks suspended in midair. A businesswoman at table 12 shook her head in disgust. Maya felt every eye in the room on her, felt the familiar burn of humiliation she'd known too well as a child. But she also felt something else rising in her chest, something stronger than shame. "I'm sorry, sir, but that's not part of my job description," she said quietly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'd be happy to call housekeeping to address any cleaning concerns." Marcus's face flushed red. How dare this nobody defy him? His voice rose to a shout. "I don't care what your job description says. You work for my family, which means you work for me. Now get on the ground and crawl around this floor until it's spotless, or you're fired." Maya's hands trembled, but she stood straighter. She thought of the little girl she'd been, constantly told she wasn't good enough, wasn't worth keeping. She thought of her brother, somewhere out there, and how she'd want him to stand up for himself if someone treated him this way.
"No, sir."
"I won't do that. If you want to fire me, that's your choice, but I won't crawl for anyone." Marcus was apoplectic. "Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea what I could do to you? I could make sure you never work in this city again." An older gentleman at a corner table stood up, his voice carrying across the room. "Young man, I've been coming to this hotel for 30 years, and I've never seen such disgraceful behavior. That young lady has more dignity in her little finger than you have in your entire body." Other diners began murmuring their agreement. Marcus felt the walls closing in, felt the judgment of people who mattered to his father's business. But instead of backing down, his anger exploded. "Fine. Security," he screamed. "Get this insubordinate employee out of my hotel. Throw her out on the street where she belongs. Security guards approached hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Maya began untying her apron with steady hands, her dignity intact even as her world crumbled. She needed this job desperately, but she wouldn't sacrifice her self-respect for it. As she folded the apron neatly, her fingers brushed against the small silver locket she always wore, the only thing she had left from her childhood. "Wait," called out Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a distinguished woman in her 70s who'd been dining alone. She stood gracefully, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Young Mr. Wellington, isn't it? I knew your grandmother quite well." Helen Wellington was a woman of extraordinary grace and kindness. "She would be horrified by what I've just witnessed." Marcus faltered for a moment. His grandmother had been his only source of unconditional love, the one person who'd seen good in him even when he couldn't see it himself. But his pride was wounded, and he lashed out. "My grandmother's dead, and you don't know anything about our family." "I know more than you think," Mrs. Patterson replied calmly. "I also know that your father, for all his faults, values loyalty and character above all else. What do you think he'll say when he hears about this?" Maya watched this exchange with growing amazement. People were actually standing up for her, something that rarely happened in her experience. A businessman called out, "That young lady handled herself with more class than you've shown in your entire tantrum." Others nodded in agreement, some even applauding Maya's courage. But Marcus was too far gone to see reason. "I don't care what any of you think. This is my family's hotel, and I'll run it however I want." He turned to Maya with venom in his voice. "You want to keep your dignity?
Fine.
But you'll never work anywhere decent in this city again. I'll make sure of it." As Maya gathered her things, something extraordinary happened. Mrs. Patterson approached her and pressed a business card into her hand. "My dear, I run a foundation that helps people further their education. Call me tomorrow." The businessman who'd spoken up earlier did the same. "We need someone with your character at our nonprofit. Here's my card." Maya's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. She'd stood up for herself and discovered that there were still good people in the world who recognized character when they saw it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you. This means more than you'll ever know." Marcus watched in disbelief as person after person approached Maya with job offers, business cards, and words of encouragement. His moment of power had backfired spectacularly. But instead of reflection, he felt only rage. How dare they choose some nobody waitress over him? As Maya walked toward the exit, she turned back one last time. For just a moment, her eyes met Marcus's, and something flickered in her expression, a shadow of recognition she couldn't quite place. She'd seen those eyes before, in dreams and old memories that felt more like wishes. But the moment passed, and she walked out into the afternoon sunlight, head held high. If this moment of courage touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. Marcus stood in the empty space Maya had left behind, surrounded by the disgusted stares of customers and staff. He'd won the battle but lost something much more important. The victory felt hollow, leaving him alone with the echoes of his grandmother's disappointed voice in his memory. But the worst part was the nagging feeling that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, though he couldn't understand why. The news of Marcus's public meltdown reached his father, Richard Wellington Jr., within an hour. The hotel's reputation was everything to the elder Wellington, and his son's behavior threatened decades of careful business relationships. That evening, Marcus found himself sitting across from his father in the mahogany-paneled office where he'd received countless lectures throughout his life. 37 customers called to complain, Richard said, his voice deadly quiet. 37, including the Morrison family, who've been hosting their anniversary dinner here for 15 years. They've canceled and moved their event to the Marriott. He slid a folder across the desk. "These are the security camera photos from this afternoon. Explain to me what I'm seeing." Marcus squirmed under his father's steely gaze. The photos showed him red-faced and shouting at Maya while she stood with quiet dignity. Even in still images, it was clear who looked like the villain. "She was insubordinate, Dad. She refused to follow my orders. I was establishing authority." Authority? Richard's voice rose. You were having a public tantrum. Do you know how this makes our family look? How this makes me look? He stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. Your grandmother always said you had good in you, Marcus. She believed you'd find your way eventually. But I'm starting to think she was wrong. The mention of his grandmother hit Marcus like a physical blow. Helen Wellington had died 2 years ago, taking with her the only unconditional love he'd ever known. She used to tell him stories about family, about how blood wasn't just about genetics but about how you treated people. A real Wellington, she'd say, lifts people up, doesn't tear them down. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He found himself in his grandmother's old study, surrounded by her books and photo albums. As he flipped through pages of family pictures, one photograph made him freeze. It was his grandmother holding 2 children, both around 5 years old. One was clearly him, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. The other was a little girl with the same warm brown eyes, the same dimpled chin. On the back, in his grandmother's careful handwriting, Marcus and Maya, age 5. 2 peas in a pod, as Helen always said. His hands shook as the memories came flooding back.
Maya.
His foster sister for 6 months when they were 5. They'd been inseparable, playing pirates in the garden, sharing secrets under blankets. She'd been the one bright spot during the lonely period after his mother left. But then his father remarried, and the new wife didn't want a foster child around. Maya was sent away, and Marcus was told to forget about her. But he never forgot. He'd asked about her for years until his father finally told him she'd been adopted by a good family and was better off without them. Marcus had accepted that lie, buried the guilt, and tried to move on. Now, 23 years later, the little girl he'd loved like a sister had been standing 3 feet away from him, and he'd treated her like dirt. Maya, meanwhile, was in her small apartment, unable to shake the feeling she'd experienced that afternoon. She pulled out a worn photo album, the only record of her childhood she'd managed to keep. There it was, the picture she'd treasured for years, herself and a little boy with kind eyes, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. She'd never known his last name, only that his grandmother Helen had been the first adult to make her feel truly loved. Have you ever faced a moment like this, where the past came rushing back? Let us know in the comments. Both Marcus and Maya sat in their respective homes that night, staring at the same photograph, finally understanding that fate had brought them together in the cruelest possible way. The brother and sister who'd once promised to always take care of each other had spent the afternoon as enemies, neither recognizing the family they'd spent decades missing. Marcus didn't sleep that night. By dawn, he was driving through the city with shaking hands, the childhood photograph clutched against his steering wheel. He had to find Maya, had to explain, had to somehow make right the horrible mistake he'd made. The hotel's human resources department reluctantly gave him her address after he threatened to fire half the staff. Maya was having coffee on her small balcony when she heard the frantic knocking. Through the peephole, she saw Marcus Wellington III, but he looked different somehow, smaller and more human than the monster from yesterday. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were red-rimmed as if he'd been crying. "Please," he called through the door, his voice breaking. "Please, Maya. I know you don't want to see me, but I have something to show you. Something about your family." Maya's heart stopped. Family was the one word that could make her open any door. She turned the lock slowly, keeping the chain latch secured. "You have 30 seconds before I call the police." Marcus held up the photograph with trembling hands. "Do you recognize this picture?" Maya's breath caught in her throat. It was identical to the one she'd been staring at all night. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "It was in my grandmother's album. That's you and me, Maya. We're brother and sister. Foster siblings when we were 5. I just remembered everything last night." Tears were streaming down his face now. "I treated you like garbage yesterday, and you're my sister. The sister I've been missing for 23 years. Maya's legs gave out. She sank to the floor behind the door, her mind reeling. The mean, entitled man from yesterday was the sweet little boy she'd dreamed about finding? The brother who used to promise he'd always protect her? "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible. That little boy was kind. He was gentle and loving and I lost all of that, Marcus said, his voice barely audible through the door. After they sent you away, I became bitter, angry. I blamed everyone else for the pain I felt at losing you. But Maya, underneath all that anger, I never stopped missing you. I never stopped hoping I'd find you again. Slowly, Maya unlatched the chain and opened the door. Standing before her was her brother, but also a stranger shaped by money and privilege and pain. They stared at each other for a long moment, seeing past the years to the children they'd once been. "I'm so sorry," Marcus sobbed. "I'm so sorry for yesterday, for becoming someone you couldn't recognize. I'm sorry for all the years I didn't look for you hard enough. I'm sorry for turning into someone Grandma Helen would be ashamed of." Maya's anger warred with her longing. This was her brother, but he was also the man who'd tried to humiliate her in front of a room full of people. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said honestly. "Not yet. You hurt me deeply, Marcus. You tried to break my spirit." "I know," he whispered, "and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But Maya, could we maybe try to find our way back to each other? I want to be the brother you deserved all those years ago. I want to be someone Grandma Helen would be proud of again." If you've been following this incredible journey, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one. Maya looked into his eyes and saw something she hadn't seen yesterday: genuine remorse, vulnerability, and beneath it all, traces of the little boy who used to read her bedtime stories and promise that family meant forever. 6 months later, Maya stood in the gleaming conference room of the Wellington Foundation, addressing a room full of board members about their new scholarship program for foster children. She wore a navy blue suit that made her feel powerful and professional, her natural confidence finally given room to shine. At the head of the table sat Marcus, but he looked nothing like the man who'd humiliated her that day in the restaurant. His eyes were warm now, focused intently on her presentation with obvious pride. The journey to this moment hadn't been easy. Maya hadn't forgiven Marcus immediately, and he'd had to earn back her trust through months of patient, consistent change. He'd started by publicly apologizing to every hotel employee he'd ever mistreated, then enrolled in therapy to address the anger and entitlement that had poisoned his heart. Most importantly, he'd begun volunteering at the foster care facility where they'd first met, reading to children who needed to hear that someone cared about their stories. Maya had been reluctant to accept his offer to fund her dream of helping other foster children, worried that it might be another form of control. But Marcus had surprised her by setting up the foundation in her name entirely, with no strings attached and no requirements that she work with him. "This is your vision," he'd said simply. "I'm just grateful you'll let me support it." Today, as Maya announced that the foundation would provide full college scholarships to 50 foster children each year, she felt a deep sense of completion. Not just because they were changing lives, but because she and Marcus had finally found their way back to being family. After the meeting, they walked through the hotel restaurant where it all began. The staff greeted Maya warmly, having learned to respect her wisdom and kindness during the restructuring process. Marcus had insisted on implementing new policies that treated every employee with dignity and created pathways for advancement. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Maya said as they sat at the table where Marcus had dropped his phone 6 months ago. "That little girl and boy we used to be, they're probably proud of who we became eventually." Marcus smiled, and for a moment Maya could see the 5-year-old who used to share his cookies with her. Grandma Helen used to say that family isn't just about being related. It's about choosing to love someone even when it's hard, even when you mess up, even when you have to forgive the unforgivable. Maya reached across the table and took his hand. She was right. "And Marcus? I'm proud to call you my brother again." Their relationship would never be simple. There would always be the complexity of their different experiences, the years of pain and separation, the work of building trust. But they'd learned that real family isn't about perfection, it's about commitment to growth, to forgiveness, to becoming better people together than they could be apart. As they left the restaurant that evening, Maya carried with her the business cards that customers had given her that terrible day, now treasure reminders that strangers had seen her worth when she'd almost forgotten it herself. Marcus carried the weight of responsibility he'd finally learned to shoulder with grace, understanding that privilege meant nothing without purpose. The little foster children they now mentored would never know loneliness the way Maya and Marcus had. And perhaps that was the greatest gift they could give, not just to those children, but to the memory of two 5-year-olds who'd once promised to take care of each other forever. If this story moved you, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments about family, forgiveness, or second chances, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories. Thank you for joining us on this journey of finding family in the most unexpected places. Until next time, remember that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be.